1913 declared war on voting rights for black people. This is 48 years after the passage of the Voting Rights Act. We are being forced to refight and relitigate battles we thought were long won. Yes. That only happens when what we keep saying is an exception is actually part of a pattern and system of not just institutional racism, but white supremacy that impacts our public policy. Yes. It impacts our institutions. It impacts our politics and our political leaders. The reason why there are debates over black equality, there are debates over black humanity, there are debates over whether it's legal or okay or morally correct to shoot young black men and women in the street is because of the politics and practices of white supremacy. You don't debate that about white lives. You don't have to say all lives matter because they don't in the context of American democracy. We know this. This is empirical. This is not something that is a perspective. We know this. So the reason why you say Black Lives Matter in 2014, 2015 is the same reason why Kwame Ture said Black Power, right, on June 16th, 1966 in Mississippi, in Greenwood, Mississippi, during the Meredith March. He said Black Power because he realized that in the context of a United States of America that was intrinsically racist, that was unapologetically racist, that was robustly racist, that denigrated and demonized and disparaged the very idea of black humanity, that saying Black Power was a what? A cri de coeur. It was a cry of the heart that said that black people not only counted, but they were going to gain power to transform power relations in America. It didn't work. It didn't work. The struggle continues. It absolutely didn't work. What we did was gain beachheads. The way we got black studies at University of Minnesota, the way we got it at Stony Brook, at City University of New York, San Francisco State, Sonia Sanchez, Amiri Baraka, Larry Neal, the Third World Women's Alliance. We had a black liberation movement that tried to do what? Form beachheads. And we did it in many different parts of society. We did it in business. We did it in culture. We talk about the black arts movement. The reason why we are even considered black people and African American people is because of the black arts movement, because of Black Power, because of Stokely Carmichael, Malcolm X, Lorraine Hansberry. And in 2015, we have some young people who are ashamed of being black because they don't understand black history. You don't understand the struggle. If you don't understand the struggle, this is about the worst place in the world to grow up. I've got a daughter. If she's going to understand the struggle because of me. If you think of yourself as tabula rasa, just a clean slate here, you're going to wonder, how come black people are unemployed? Black youth unemployment is 50-60% in cities. Yes. The new job numbers came out, and it's a joke. They're saying unemployment is at 5%. Not for black people. Right. Not for black people. Never. For black people, it's in the double digits. For some people, especially for our young black men and young black women, unemployment is a national crisis, right? And it's a national crisis that is based on institutional racism. It's targeted oppression, yet when we talk about affirmative action, people don't want to talk about affirmative action. That's reverse racism, except when it's affirmative action for white folks, which is the history of the United States. So that's just a broad, that's just a preface, and then I want to get specific. That's just a preface. What do we even mean by civil rights? In the context of American history, there's always been a black liberation struggle. Vincent Harding, the historian, taught us in the book There Is a River that the black liberation struggle begins during the transatlantic slave trade. Okay? So there were Africans on ships who revolted. There were slave revolts in the United States that got people, plantation owners, so upset that they had militias on guard in the late 18th century, early 19th century. When we think about slavery between 1791 and 1865, America becomes the largest cotton producer and exporter in the world. There are more millionaires per capita in Mississippi than any other place in the United States. We've got all these new great works on slavery and capitalism. You go back to Du Bois and Black Reconstruction. You go back to Eric Williams and capitalism and slavery, but also Sven Becker's Empire of Cotton, also River of Dark Dreams by Walter Johnson, also The Half Has Never Been Told by Ed Baptiste, and you can get a context for what slavery really was in the United States. What I want to say about slavery very briefly before moving into the 20th century is that the way in which we teach slavery in the United States, when we teach it, is that it was an aberration on an otherwise healthy body politic. This is wrong.
Right.
This is erroneous. Slavery was not an aberration. Slavery is constitutive. It's a constitutive part of American democracy and liberal democratic capitalism. There's still no reparations. There should be reparations. We don't have a national discussion about reparations, and what I mean by reparations is this. Black labor produced wealth in the United States. It's unpaid for. It's unpaid for. Black labor produced wealth in the United States. It produced the wealth that has produced railroads and companies, the Vanderbilts, the Carnegies, the Rockefellers. It was created by black labor. We need to understand that, right? And some people say, well, you know, slavery ended in 1865, but what, you know, why didn't you just sort of pull yourselves by the bootstraps up then? I've got an answer. The next 100 years, it's not even saying even Steven. If people said, hey, the slate is clean and let's all just compete. We've got the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments, right, which provide voting rights only for black men, which provides citizenship and the end of slavery legally, except for prisoners, right? 13th Amendment, which is why we've got 2.3 million people locked away, including those who are performing labor that is unpaid. So the Constitution gives you an exception. The next 100 years, we have a system that is euphemistically referred to as Jim Crow, but it's a system of white supremacy. And this is connected to Ferguson and Baltimore. It's connected to residential segregation. It's connected to the New Deal. The New Deal gives you two-tiered liberalism, one for blacks and one for whites. Federal Housing Authority gives African Americans sky-rise projects and whites Levitt towns all across the United States. Right? Redlining and zoning and housing discrimination, right? Black people who could afford houses were not getting subsidized by the federal government. White counterparts were. What that did generationally is produce wealth for the white middle class in the form of housing, and it produced no access for African Americans. So by the time you get to 2005 and Katrina, and people were wondering, how come people didn't get out of the city? How come they don't own cars? How come they're living in places that don't have decent plumbing? This is about the politics and practices of white supremacy and institutional racism connected to public policy that is generational. Dr. King didn't solve that. Malcolm X didn't solve that. We keep congratulating ourselves for a story that hasn't ended. It's gotten worse for most of the 40 million black people in the United States. That's right. Is everybody still with me? It's gotten worse for most of the 40 million black people in the United States. So here's where we're at right now. The story of the civil rights movement, we're convinced it's Rosa Parks, it's Dr. King, Emmett Till. So it's Brown versus Board of Education, May 17, 1954. Remember, the Brown decision doesn't desegregate schools. Why? Because of massive white resistance. Right. It's not just the Klan, it's good white folks who are going to PTA meetings, who bake bread, and they love cookies. I'm not being facetious. It's good people who raised their kids the right way, except they were anti-black racists. They were white supremacists. That includes people who went to Ole Miss, University of Alabama, University of Minnesota, Macalester. We are all guilty. We are all guilty. We are all guilty. Right? In 2008, what Barack Obama did as a candidate, March 18, 2008, in Philadelphia, instead of just really speaking truth to power, he was trying to save his candidacy in the context of Jeremiah Wright, and he split the baby like King Solomon. He talked about slavery March 18, 2008, and said, well, I understand why black people are upset. Black people are upset because of slavery, Jim Crow, white supremacy, lynching, the rape and violation of women and babies and families. But then he said, I also understand why white people are upset. I'm watching. Hey, you see what he's going to say. He said white people are upset because of affirmative action. They're upset because of black people and racial grievances. They're upset because they don't really think they had anything to do with slavery. And then I'm thinking, everybody's applauding. And New York Times, everybody said that was the most masterful speech on race since like Abraham Lincoln. I'm thinking to myself, there's not a moral equivalency between white anti-black racism and resentment and slavery.
Yes.
There's not a moral equivalency. There's not a political equivalency, but it exists in our own minds. It really does. People say, well, slavery was something that happened in the past, right? So when we think about this civil rights movement, we've convinced ourselves that the Brown decision, that the Montgomery bus boycott that introduces a 26-year-old Martin Luther King Jr., 55 to 56, we've convinced ourselves Emmett Till being lynched, 14-year-old black boy whose body is found in the Tallahatchie River in August of 1955, who says bye baby to the wife of a white shop owner and is lynched and shot and mutilated. His body is viewed in an open casket that is the cover of Jet magazine in 1955. Emmett Till predates Trayvon Martin, is our first national civil rights martyr. The people who kill Emmett Till are found not guilty. Congressman Charles Diggs from Michigan, black man, is going into court and the judge is saying nigga, nigga, nigga to the congressman. 1955 in Mississippi. There's no way you can say small d democracy existed in Mississippi in 1955 in that context. The murderers of Emmett Till sold their story for $4,000 to Look magazine. And you're saying that this is the United States of America? This is America? This is why Malcolm X said that American democracy was nothing more than disguised hypocrisy. Right? Right? So we're convinced that when we think about that, Little Rock, 1957, I'm giving you a little catalog of what I call the heroic period of the civil rights movement. 1957, and the desegregation of Little Rock High School, where there's the mobs of whites attacking young African Americans trying to get education. 1957. What do those images tell us, right? You've got the Norman Rockwell painting of that. What do those images tell us about our society? What does it tell us about how we're valuing black people? Is it a surprise that 50 years after Little Rock Central High was predominantly African American, predominantly poor, predominantly underachieving? Is there a surprise? Are we surprised at that? Do we think that somehow that is not part of a pattern of systemic racial oppression and subjugation that's not just personal, it's always political and it's always connected to policy? 1960, one of the most important years in this period, February 1st, 1960, the sit-in movement. And what the sit-in movement does is really inspire direct action, where 4 black students from historically black college and university, and remember, it's the HBCUs that are so important. You know, A&T, Howard University, Fisk, Spelman, Morehouse, Miles College, small and large historically black colleges and universities are so important to this movement. They sit in at a Woolworth lunch counter, which is now a civil rights museum, and they are not just demanding, like James Baldwin wrote a couple of years later, these students are doing more than just sitting in at lunch counters to sip tasteless cups of coffee, right? And at what Baldwin calls sleazy lunch counters, because only James Baldwin could speak that way.
That's right. Oh, James.
These students were trying to topple an order that was resting on white supremacy, that was resting on not just racial oppression, but economic oppression too, because they're both connected. It's just that, so the problem with when people talk about Bernie Sanders, he's got to be shamed into talking about Black Lives Matter. So he talks about economic justice without connecting that to racial inequality and white supremacy. You can't have that. So that becomes the old socialist line, the old Marxist line, right? Right? The old line is like, they're telling all the black folks, you know what? It's about class. And the reason why Hubert Harrison, who was a mentor to Marcus Garvey, came up with the slogan, race first, is because he was part of the Socialist Party in the 19-teens and 20s. And he said that every time he talked about black people, they said, no, Hubert, you can't talk about them. And he said, my new slogan is race first, because every time you're talking about economic justice, you mean race first for white people.
There you go.
And so he said race first. We've got to talk about race first, but it's race and class. It's both. But the core of this story is the racial subjugation of African Americans is also an economic subjugation. So the thing about SNCC, Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, it comes out of the sit-in movement, right? And SNCC becomes a movement to try to transform democracy that is black-led, although there's going to be white students who are involved, that has a criticism of structural racism. So when we think about the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, and Stokely Carmichael comes out of this, John Lewis comes out of this, so many, Gwen Patton, Fran Beal, so many different black women and men, but also Casey Hayden. There's going to be different white allies who are part of this group too. What's important about SNCC is that SNCC says there's something wrong structurally with the institutions in American society, right? They go into Alabama, Mississippi, Southwest Arkansas, and they organize. Stokely Carmichael is one of the key organizers. And when we think about what SNCC tried to do, is they tried to actually bring about small d democracy in parts of the United States where it never existed. And I talk about SNCC because Black Lives Matter activists really remind me of SNCC. Yep. They remind me of Harry Belafonte calls SNCC the shock troops of American democracy. The shock troops of American democracy, who are trying to not restore, but bring about something that had never been, right? And so when we think about this heroic period of the civil rights movement, 1960 is very, very important. 1961, the freedom rides are very, very important. Interracial groups of freedom riders going and traveling to North Carolina, traveling to Mississippi, Alabama, and other places. They're going to be firebombed in May of 61 in Anniston, Alabama. It's going to force the Kennedy administration into trying to help the civil rights movement. 1962, James Meredith becomes the first black student to enroll at Ole Miss. There's going to be 3 days of rioting with several people killed as a result. 1963 is not only the March on Washington, but it's the centennial of the Emancipation Proclamation. And so 63 is very, very important. Martin Luther King Jr. writes Letter from Birmingham Jail. He's in prison in Birmingham, Alabama in the spring of 1963. And in that letter, King says that what the young people, because people are being criticized, they're telling King he should wait. They're telling King that they're moving too fast. And this is King, so we're going to get to Malcolm. They're telling King he's moving too fast in 63. And King is saying, one day the young people in Birmingham are going to be remembered as heroes for what King describes, he writes down in his letter from Birmingham jail, for bringing the nation back to those great wells of democracy that were dug deep by the founding fathers. Now, King was being too kind because the founding fathers did not dig a deep well of democracy, right? He was using it as a rhetorical sleight of hand. The cutting edge of democracy historically has been the black liberation movement. It's been black women and black men who are expanding the pie, right? That's the cutting edge of democracy. So the cutting edge of democracy is not been folks who are the landed gentry in the United States. They've stayed the same for the most part. The cutting edge has been those who haven't had access, right? And that includes women, it includes people who are immigrants, it includes people who are disabled, it includes LGBT, it includes an expansive group, but black people have been at the core, the forefront. Not because we're extra special, right? But because we've been catching hell in the United States for 400 years. That's right. When we think about that time period that I'm saying, 63 is also the period that John F. Kennedy does his famous race speech, June 11th, 1963. The president says that, race is a moral problem. He talks about black babies dying and the rates between black and white babies dying. It's a great speech by Kennedy. That same evening, Medgar Evers is assassinated in Mississippi. Right? So it's getting real when we think about 63. Now, the March on Washington happens August 28, 63, but before the March on Washington on June 23rd, 63, Dr. King and black power activists like Albert Clegg in Detroit, Grace and James Lee Boggs, so many others had a massive march in Detroit. And that's where King says his first I Have a Dream speech, June 23rd, 1963, 125,000 people. The importance of the March on Washington speech, which we never talk about, is that King talks about reparations in that March on Washington speech. He begins that speech by saying, now is the time to make real the promise of democracy. He says that we've come to the nation's capital to cash a check that has been stamped insufficient funds, but we refuse to believe that the Bank of American Democracy is bankrupt, right? That's what he says, right? So when we think about the March on Washington is for jobs and freedom. And we still, 52 years later, need a March on Washington for jobs and freedom.
Yes.
Right?
Yes. Right.
So when we think about 63, the 4 little girls who are assassinated in Birmingham, Alabama, 16th Street Baptist Church, right? A terrorist bomb kills 4 girls who are age 11 to 14, right? And you can see part of that in the movie Selma. 63 is also the year that John F. Kennedy is assassinated, November 22nd, 1963. So by 64 and 65, we have a new president, Lyndon Johnson, and we've got new movement and new momentum. We've got Freedom Summer, where SNCC and 1,000 volunteers, including a large contingent of white students, go into Mississippi trying to organize for not just voting rights, but organize for civil rights in Mississippi. Civil Rights Act is passed. By 65, we've got the Selma to Montgomery demonstration. Voting Rights Act is passed. But 5 days after the Voting Rights Act is passed, August 6, 1965, 5 days later, Watts blows up. Los Angeles, from August 11th to August 18th. 34 dead, millions in damage. People say, well, what more do they want? Why did Watts blow up? Got the Voting Rights Act, we got the Civil Rights Act. Here's the thing, we can connect this to Black Lives Matter, we can connect it, I want to talk about Black Power, Malcolm X, and then get into Black Lives Matter. But here's the thing. The freedom that was being offered was not enough, okay? Public policy is very good, but it only goes so far when the policy doesn't address institutionalized racism and discrimination and lack of opportunity. Institutionalized economic marginalization. Institutionalized miseducation, even to the point where even now, 2015, Barack Obama has My Brother's Keeper, and we see that for African American boys, by the time they're 8, if they're not on 3rd grade reading level, it's an accurate predictor of their life chances, meaning they're going to be going to jail, they're going to be in prison, parole, probation. Here's the thing. My Brother's Keeper is financed with $200 million in private funds. That should be a multi-billion-dollar effort, because what's going on with black boys in this country and young black men is a national catastrophe. It's a disaster. But again, it's part of a pattern. And I didn't say conspiracy, I said pattern. I don't believe in conspiracies. I'm a social scientist. I'm a scholar. I don't believe in conspiracies. I'm saying this is a pattern. And it's a pattern that predates the country's inception. Because slavery predates 1776. It's just that the great heroes of the American Revolution didn't want to end slavery. It was too profitable. Okay? So when we talk about the founding fathers and what Dr. King said, the great wells of democracy, we have to understand that. There were people at the time who did say, hey, let's end this slavery thing. And yes, some of them were black. They had a vested interest. Okay? You know, they had a vested interest. Say, hey, you're talking about freedom and independence? Well, what about this slavery thing? People say, nah, forget about that. We don't want to talk about that. Right? So when we think about this period of 54 to 65, and now I want to talk about Black Power and Malcolm X, what we've said to ourselves is that by passing this legislation, and in the aftermath of Martin Luther King Jr.'s assassination, April 4th, 1968, we passed an Open Housing Act, that the story is over. Even during the 2008 election, there was a little homily that Rosa sat so Martin could walk, so Barack could run, so your children could fly. That's what we said to ourselves, right? That's cute. You know, I've got a daughter. I love to read bedtime stories, right? That's historically inaccurate. And it's a mythology and a falsehood that doesn't work for our present. The reason why, there's 40 million black people in the United States. Over half of black civil society is living in shambles. It's not because black people lack responsibility. It's not because, as Don Lemon says, we wear our pants too baggy. It's not because somehow we are lesser than other human beings. It's because there's been a systematic politics and practice of white supremacy since this nation's founding. So the exception to the rule are African Americans who have actually succeeded, who've gone through a narrow tunnel of success. You know, there's some black people who are so proud and they'll say, well, even in the 18th century, my people were free, right? Well, you know, hooray for you. You know, that's great. You know, it's like, but we've had PhDs in my family since the 19th century. Well, thumbs up for you. For most of us, that has not been the case. My people are from the Caribbean. In Haiti, we were liberated in 1804 after a 13-year war. Yet now people say, well, Haiti is the poorest country in the Western Hemisphere. Yeah, because of external exploitation, right? I mean, there's been internal problems, including corruption, but Haiti has been a victim of its own success, right? And not just through United States, but France and Europe. The colonial powers hated Haiti because Haiti actually went from a colony of slaves to a republic of citizens that was led by black people, right? So don't ever think what you're reading about Haiti and the aftermath of the earthquake is true. Read some real books about the Haitian Revolution, and you'll see the impact the Haitian Revolution had on black people right here in the United States, including Frederick Douglass and abolitionists, right? So what we have to understand is that what we talk about in the United States in terms of the civil rights movement, the narrative that we have is off. The narrative that we have is empirically wrong, and what it does, if our young people, especially I'm speaking now to the young people here, if you don't understand your own history, it's not that you're doomed to repeat it. If you don't understand your history here in the United States, if you're a young black man, you're a young black woman, you are going to be a non-person here in this country. Because if you don't get the history, you have no sense of yourself. Malcolm taught us that. Marcus Garvey taught us that. Lorraine Hansberry taught us that. So many different people have taught us that. And the reason why they taught us that is that if you believe the lies that the United States is telling you about your own history, if you believe the lies that are being told to you about slavery and the civil rights movement, you are going to want to kill yourself. Okay? You really will. If you think that somehow there's something genetically deficient with you, if you think that somehow the only way you can compete is because of affirmative action, and you don't realize that white people have been benefiting from affirmative action since the founding of this country, you are in dire straits, right? If you don't understand that mass incarceration is part and parcel of institutionalized racism and subjugation and state-sanctioned violence against black people that is historic, that is continuous, that is robust in our own time, even with a black president, you're going to be lost. You're going to be lost. And the only way you can understand is being born black doesn't give this to you by some genetic code. You have to work for this information. You have to earn this information. You have to lose and struggle for this information, right? And that information, and this goes to people, it's not, I'm a historian, but this goes to people, whether you're going to own a startup company, and it's for the white folks and Latinos here too, because you're not going to have a sense of who you are unless you understand the wider context of American and global history. There's a reason why we're all here today. There's a reason why there's the juxtaposition of Barack Obama and Ferguson. When we think about Black Lives Matter and Fox News calling them racial terrorists, they called Dr. King a racial terrorist. They said Malcolm X was a reverse racist, right? Because Malcolm was talking about self-determination by any means necessary. And he's someone to talk about right now. Malcolm Little, born May 19th, 1925, Omaha, Nebraska. Malcolm Little, whose father, Earl Little, was a Garveyite preacher who was murdered by white supremacists in Lansing, Michigan. Malcolm Little, whose mother, Louise Little, right, was a Caribbean intellectual and activist. Malcolm Little, who was raised in the mean streets of Detroit and Boston and Harlem and incarcerated from 1946 to 1952. Malcolm Little, who becomes Malcolm X when he's in prison in Massachusetts. He's in Charlestown, he's in Norfolk, he's in Concord, right? Massachusetts, which is now a Max facility that I've taught at. By the time he comes out, August 7th, 1952, and between then and his death, February 21st, his assassination, 1965, he is Malcolm X, El-Hajj Malik El-Shabazz, right? Malcolm X transforms himself. The reason why Malcolm X, for many, becomes the most dangerous man in America is because Malcolm X confronts the jagged edges of American democracy and white supremacy. Malcolm X is willing to speak truth to power way before he leaves the Nation of Islam. Don't believe the narrative that Malcolm sees the light only after 1963. That's not true. That's not true. The reason why Malcolm doesn't break with the nation before then is like anybody who joins a political party. You join a political party not because you believe every single thing the group is saying, but because you believe it can amplify your voice. Don't think that the president believes everything the Democratic Party is saying. Don't think that people who are in Congress or the Senate believe everything the Republican Party is saying. Don't think that people who say they're in the Green Party or they're Marxist or in a feminist party or an environmental party. You join a larger group to amplify your voice. So even if you believe in 70% of what they're saying, right? If there's more than one of you, you've amplified your voice. So when we think about Malcolm X, the importance of Malcolm is crucial, especially for the young men here, because Malcolm articulates and personifies a philosophy of self-determination, of rigorous discipline, but also courage and boldness that you would do well to exemplify in your own life. And he started with reading in jail. He started with reading. The biggest way you can arm yourself is by reading and writing every day.
Yes.
That's the biggest way you can arm yourself, especially in this society. Dr. King said it was a sick society. I'm not saying it. Dr. King said it, so I'm going to say I agree. Dr. King said it was a sick society, America, and it was infected with the illness, the disease of anti-black racism.
Yes.
King said that militarism, materialism, and racism were the triple threats facing humanity, and they're still the triple threats facing humanity, right?
That's right.
But what Malcolm said, and this is where Malcolm becomes a hero to so many people, when he talked about by any means necessary, when he had the message to the grassroots, Malcolm talked about third world global solidarity. Malcolm knew about the 1955 Bandung Conference, where the 29 nations met and did their non-aligned movement. Malcolm created the Organization for Afro-American Unity, patterned after Kwame Nkrumah's Organization of African Unity. Malcolm was a Pan-Africanist, a global internationalist, a human rights revolutionary. Malcolm was going to take the United States to the United Nations and accuse them of human rights violation. And black activists had planned something similar with We Charge Genocide in the 1940s, Langston Hughes and others. So when we think about Malcolm and who was Malcolm X, Malcolm X was a black working class hero. He represented the racial underclass in the United States. Malcolm had been incarcerated. The Nation of Islam had reformed thousands of African American prisoners, but it's Malcolm who turns the nation from a group of around 500 to over 25,000. So Malcolm is an organizer, he's an activist, he's an intellectual, but he's a person who loves poor black people. And the convergence with Dr. King and people like Stokely Carmichael is that the poorest of black people, the black people who people like Bill Cosby dismissed years ago, the black people who are called nothing, who are called gutter trash, the black people who black people call the N-word. Those black people are the black people who Malcolm loved. Black people who've had issues of addiction, black people who've had issues of mental illness, black people who don't have PhDs, and what Malcolm said, no Ds.
Yes.
Right? Those are the people who he loved, right? And we in our own time would do well to follow that example right now in 2015. Because there are many more of us who are incarcerated, who have no access, who need help and assistance than there are those of us who are riding high and are successful. And there's a reason for that. There is a reason for that. And the reason is not that we are somehow genetically inflicted. It's not that. It's not that somehow we engage in immoral personal behavior. What it is something that is structural. It's structural racism. Civil rights did not solve structural racism, but what the Black Power movement at least did was speak truth to power. So what Black Power activists, and this is Stokely Carmichael, this is the Black Panther Party for Self-Defense, this is the Third World Women's Alliance, this is the Student Organization of Black Unity, the Youth Organization of Black Unity, this is the Black Arts Movement, this is Sonia Sanchez, Nikki Giovanni, this is Leroy Jones, Amiri Baraka, right? This is Larry Neal, this is Addison Gale, right? This is so many different people. James Combs, Black Liberation Theology.
Let's go, there you go.
Right? What the Black Power movement did is say that these institutions in the United States are bankrupt because of the way in which they treat black people and poor people, people of color. Black Power movement inspires a brown power movement too. Think about Fred Hampton.
That's right.
There are white allies in the movement too.
That's right.
So when we think about Black Power, even before we get to Black Lives Matter, and they're all connected, is that what the Black Power movement did, the beachheads are the black student unions. The beachheads are the black studies departments. The beachheads are the places in America where we can talk about these things and critically analyze, but also try to organize. What Kwame Ture Stokely Carmichael told us was to organize, organize, organize. You know, and Dr. El-Kati knows that. He told us to organize, organize, organize. So there's a book out by Ta-Nehisi Coates, and you guys may have heard of it, called Between the World and Me. And I would recommend everybody to get it. I'm teaching it in the spring as well. People have criticized that book, saying Ta-Nehisi is being too pessimistic. He's writing a letter to his young 15-year-old son about racism, police brutality, Black Lives Matter, all these different things. What I would say is this: where we're at today, we should not be pessimistic. We should be optimistic, and I'll tell you why. The history that we have in the United States is a history of shared oppression, but also shared struggle, right? The mistake we've made is thinking that certain marches and demonstrations and certain legislation means that we've won. That was the mistake. The mistake we made is by thinking that blocking certain impediments to citizenship was actual citizenship. It's not the same thing. It's not the same thing. It's the same metaphor that Malcolm used. If you have a knife in my back and you pull it out 6 inches and you call that progress, it's not progress. And that's what we've done collectively as a society. So you point to the black president and the first lady and Sasha and Malia, and I say, man, they are beautiful, right? But is the reverberation all the way down to Minneapolis and St. Paul? No, it's not, right? It's not all the way down to the grassroots, to local people, to ordinary people, to little black babies, to little black boys and girls, right? That's a massive problem. The Black Lives Matter movement, and I want to close by talking about Black Lives Matter. What it's done is illuminate the way in which the criminal justice system is a gateway to panoramic oppression in the United States. It's just a gateway. Criminal justice is connected to public schools. Parole probation is connected to the Clinton crime bill and Clinton welfare reform. It's connected to what Ronald Reagan was doing at the federal level in the 1980s and what has continued. It's connected to grants, the major grants that the federal government gives to law enforcement across the United States that incentivize them to arrest people, right? They give them massive block grants, and the more arrests, the more money you make. There's many local police departments that are basing their entire budgets on grants, and the way in which they get these grants, they arrest black and brown young men in the United States. That is happening right now. Obama went to the federal prison in Oklahoma and says, well, he's going to try to stop it at the federal level. It's Pandora's box. Genie's out of the box. You really need congressional legislation to really do something major. The 3 strikes law disproportionately impacted black folks, especially men, right? One of the things the Clinton crime bill did was say, even if you're selling marijuana, you can never gain access again to public housing. You can never get food stamps. These are people who are now in jail. They're going to come out. Obama's introduced the ban the box at the federal level, but that's only a tiny policy intervention. Ex-cons have no chance in this country. That's why the recidivism rate is so massive. But ex-cons also have families. They have babies. The children of those who are incarcerated are the biggest victims, and we keep reproducing these cycles and wondering why things aren't getting better, right? And this impacts not just poor people, but the middle class as well, right? The African American middle class is at its most precarious state ever. They are 1 and 2 paychecks away from disaster. They're the only group that has not recovered from the Great Recession. And even before the Great Recession, African American homeowners were the ones receiving the so-called mud loans from Wells Fargo. Even families with income of $200,000 a year or more were getting varied adjustable mortgage rates because they were black. So the same kind of racism that we thought of as the old Jim Crow, as the past racism, is flourishing and proliferating in our own time, right?
That's right.
The cultural racism is massive. Twitter, social media, people, and don't get me taken off my jacket here. People are upset that there's some black folks in Star Wars. So, they're very upset. They're saying, how come?
James Bond?
They said Idris Elba is too much of a thug to be James Bond.
Yes.
So the racism that we're impacting, that we're encountering right now it's deep, it's profound, it's in your face. And so for the young people, what you need to do, and it's the older I've gotten, the more fortunate I feel, and as a father, I feel very fortunate to have been raised by the mother I was raised by, lived in the city that I was raised in New York City, because it taught me so much, and it made you so thick-skinned to be able to understand, but also encounter and be bold and be brave and courageous. Is that you got to understand who you are, because this is a very difficult time in terms of being black. I think the most important part of the Black Lives Matter movement has been the consciousness raising, right? The consciousness raising that for those of us who are long marchers in this movement, and Dr. El-Kati is the longest marcher here in this room. For those of us who are long marchers in this movement, we know we're living extraordinary times, and we know that racism is vibrant, it's real, it's impactful. The importance of Ferguson, the importance of Baltimore, the tragedies and the martyrdom of Trayvon Martin. We've seen the Tea Party and the right-wing assault. In the aftermath of Obama's election, Southern Poverty Law Center has documented the rise of white supremacy in the country and the resurgence of white supremacist hate groups all over America, right? Within this context, what's going on, Black Lives Matter is so necessary to galvanize young people.
Yes.
SNCC and Black Power activists were 18, 19, 20, 21, right? There were older and middle-aged forces, and there were the griots and the elders, of course. But these activists were young people. So we are all gonna die, everybody in this room, some of us sooner than others. So we have to bequeath a legacy. And the most important thing we can do for the young people is tell the truth.
Yes.
Tell the truth.
Yes.
And tell the truth. And the young people in Ferguson, who they call them rioting, I say it was an urban rebellion that was happening in Ferguson. Part of their anger and rage is that they've been lied to.
Yes.
People have told them that the civil rights movement and all the blood that was shed provided them opportunity, and it's not true empirically. There's so many people in Chicago right now dying. There's so many people in Boston dying, in Mattapan and Dorchester. There's so many young people dying from gang violence, from drug violence, from gun violence in this country right now, right? They have not been bequeathed equal opportunity, right? And Dr. King said that he called it the World House, a community that was interwoven. There was a panoramic, it was a tapestry, that we were all interconnected. And I think we really all are. So I'm gonna close on this. When we think about this idea of civil rights to Black Lives Matter, the reason why we have to say Black Lives Matter, and it's not all lives matter, I'm not Hillary Clinton, I'm not running for president, so I can speak the truth. I don't have to say, I don't need votes from anybody in this room. I'm a tenured professor. I don't need votes from anybody in this room. The reason why we have to say Black Lives Matter is because in our country, historically and contemporaneously, they never have mattered. That is a major problem. But we have to speak the truth. We have to speak truth to power and say, we are saying Black Lives Matter, and by saying that, do we include other groups? Yes. But why can't Black Lives Mattering be universal?
Exactly.
Why can't it be universal?
Yes.
That's what Stokely Carmichael told Bayard Rustin in 1966. Bayard Rustin told him that Black power wasn't universal enough. Stokely said that it was universal, but he said it was universal in black. And wrap your head around that.
Right.
Right? So when we think about Black Lives Matter is universal, but it also acknowledges the most horrific truth that we constantly deny in the United States. That slavery, that Jim Crow, that racism, that racial inequality, that the politics and practices of white supremacy are intrinsic in the core of our national story as Americans.
Yes.
Thank you.
Can't thank you enough. There's no way.
How do you position or can you speak on race and class and the encouragement of voting in the current climate? And how do we reconcile candidates who are forced, but then start to talk about it in making an informed decision?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. In terms of voting, I think everybody should vote, and I also think that the reason why so many young people don't vote and poor people don't vote is that voting in the United States is connected to a politics of privilege, racial and class privilege. When we look at voting patterns and who votes, in 2012, for the first time in the presidential election, African American voter turnout was higher than whites. By the next summer, the Supreme Court disemboweled the Voting Rights Act. I don't think it's a conspiracy. I think it's part of a pattern of racial injustice in the United States. When it comes to what we should do as informed voters and citizens, I think that you're always forced to compromise when you vote for somebody. Because if you think about it, the candidates, Malcolm X is not a candidate. Shirley Chisholm, Angela Davis, these are people I'd consider for president. They're not candidates for president. Hillary Clinton, Bernie Sanders, Jeb Bush, all these different folks, Marco Rubio. Right now, the two major party system has revealed itself to be bankrupt because we don't have major choices. Right. We would all love multiple parties where we could at least form coalitions that were ruling coalitions like you do in a parliamentary system, basically. Part of the reason why it's not working here is because the two major parties are really housing many, many different parties. And you can see it on the Republican side, you can see it sometimes on the Democratic side. Right now, there are many more Democratic candidates for president than Bernie Sanders and Hillary Clinton. They don't have the money to break through. There's many people who would want to be out there, including black candidates, but they do not have the money and people who would be credible candidates. So I think what you have to do is look and see which major party candidate is connected to the policy issues you're interested in and is talking about those issues. I think in a very specific way, you've got to say what, and I think people have accused Black Lives Matter movement, for instance, of not having an agenda, and I dispute that and I disagree with it. One, the movement's very diffuse. There's many local movements. Many of them do have agendas in terms of what they want policy-wise, in terms of mass incarceration, full employment. One of the most brilliant aspects of the movement has been the way in which they understand oppression to be interlocking, and they understand identity to be intersectional. So what you see is an understanding among a lot of BLM activists is that the criminal justice system is really the tip of the iceberg. That's what we're talking about. The criminal justice system is the tip of the iceberg. It's connected to housing in this country. It's connected to student loans. It's connected to state violence that's not just the police, but environmental violence against black communities and poor communities.
Right.
Poor black people can't get, and this is gonna shock the people in this room, poor black people, there's no Whole Foods in the neighborhood. People are like, what? There's no Whole Foods? I'm not kidding. They're like, poor black people, there's no Trader Joe's in the neighborhood. So when you're thinking, man, I'm gonna go to, I'm going to Whole Foods and my lady, we're cooking up this, I've got the fresh salad for her, I got the salmon for her, because my lady loves yoga, she's really healthy and the whole thing. Everybody's saying, hey, this is what I'm gonna do, right? You can't get that stuff. I got the organic fruits and nuts that she wants. Remember what X-Clan taught us, living off the earth, eating herbs and fruit, right? For those who remember that, right? Yeah. They don't remember that. They don't remember X-Clan. We got next time I come here, we got to make sure they listen to some X-Clan before I come here. You know what I'm saying? Some X-Clan and some Public Enemy. So I'm going back like that. Or at least listen to Kendrick Lamar. All right, I'll give you Kendrick Lamar. So I got the black of the berry, right? I got it right there. I got it in my little iPhone. So when we think about who we're gonna vote for, we have to make sure that they're understanding those issues. Because again, what I want to implore the young people to understand here is the level of economic and social and political and cultural violence that black people are under assault. Black people right now are under physical assault, health assault, mental health. We have the most undiagnosed mental health needs in the country. No access to those mental health needs. Our young people, our babies are literally dying because we live disproportionately next to environmental hazard.
Yes, right.
Black children's asthma is on the way up, right? So African Americans are so segregated, they form a third world within the context of the United States. So you talk about a nation within a nation or an internal colony, and then you got all these kids who are privileged, white, black, Latino, and they want to go to Africa to help. You need help right here, brother. You need help right here, sister. You want to go to Africa. I'm saying that there's real problems right here. And so there's such a big cultural racism. People are fine with helping a black person from Uganda, and I've had white students tell me too, where it's like they're saying, well, those people, they're just not as angry. You know what I'm saying? So you want to go to the good blacks. You know what I'm saying? You're like, I'm going to help those good black people over. They're just not as angry. That's a major problem. It's a major problem. So one more question.
So thank you so much for coming. I really appreciate it, and I've learned a lot from what you taught us tonight. I've always connected and made this connection between the experience of blacks, African Americans in America, and the biblical days of the Jewish people in the Israelis in Egypt. Even though you said we shouldn't, entertain pessimism, but I've always thought about it given the little that I've known about history. They were in slavery in Egypt for 400 years. And afterwards, they moved out of Egypt to a place that they call their own. But my question is, historically, as a historian, do you have any precedent to that? Because I'm always looking at the situation of African Americans in America.
Yeah.
Can we be free? We are over 400 years here in America. So is it really possible? Because if you look at the experience of people in Africa, it's not because, we don't necessarily have that freedom per se in Africa, but at least it's our land.
Yeah.
Wow.
And it's our land, and they left.
Yeah.
But they brought African Americans here. So being here, is there any historical context to being enslaved on the land and being free there with the people that actually enslaved them?
That's a great question. Right now, nothing's coming to mind. You want to have the ending. I'll flip the question in this sense. This is like Stokely used to say, Kwame Ture used to say that this was Native American people's lands, but this is also our land too. You know what I mean? I think this is for Latinos, it's for all of us. Like and the reason I say it's our land, and I've written about this extensively, that we've shed blood here domestically. Not just we fought in every war in this country, but we've also shed blood. And I would encourage everybody to read the book, a few books, The New Jim Crow by Michelle Alexander, but also The Half Has Never Been Told by Ed Baptist, which really, in a very, very brutal, meticulous way, gives you a depiction of slavery from the voices of the enslaved. Because he used the 3,000, those interviews from the Works Progress administrations. Those are the last interviews from people who had been enslaved, so enslaved Africans during the New Deal, Works Progress Administration. So what I would say is this, this is our country too. So the idea of, one of the things we have to remember is that the freedom and the liberation that we sought in this country, we have earned. So don't let people flip the script on you and say you were given freedom. Dr. King said it too. He said, freedom, we're not gonna just get freedom. Dr. King said, we're gonna have to fight for it. Malcolm X said to me, one of my heroes is Fannie Lou Hamer. Fannie Lou Hamer in 1964 at the Democratic National Convention, she does a live address before the Credentials Committee. She's speaking truth to power. Lyndon Johnson does a press conference to stop the live feed. Because Fannie Lou Hamer is on national television talking about the violence that she's experienced and that black people have experienced. And she says, the quote is, she says, our lives are being threatened every day in Mississippi for wanting to live like decent human beings. And she says, is this America, the land of the free, home of the brave? I'm going to answer that question. Yep. It is. But here's the thing. What she did was struggle, dies prematurely in 1977, diabetic, brutalized, right? Right here in the United States. The thing is, here's the thing. The optimism is that somebody's willing to go through that to try to transform this nation and this society. She did it for all of us. That's the optimism, right? The pessimism is when so many people don't get it or young people seem impenetrable. This is better than your iPhone. It's better than the iPad.
Yes,
it's better than anything. Because guess what? It's going to be sustenance for you. Because what you don't understand now, and I hate to say it, I did at your age because I graduated at 17. I was doing a PhD by the time I was 20. You've got to have the internal resources to understand who you are intrinsically. Once you do, you never take drugs.
Right.
You don't drink excessively. You don't do anything because you're disciplined within yourself. Malcolm, it took him 6.5 years in prison to get that. Yeah. You're luckier. You're luckier. You've got the access. I mean, so on one level, what we've been taught in the Black liberation movement is something called self-determination, right? There used to be a company called FUBU, for us, by us, right? It was saying that we could do it ourselves, and we needed to do it ourselves, right? So everything, that and a library card is going to get you free. That's all, really, right? So I've told students this, and I've been teaching for 17 years at the university level. I've told students that the one thing you need is discipline. And you don't have to believe everything I say. I want critical thinkers who are going to challenge the stuff I say, right? But the one thing you need is discipline, right? The discipline, and what Stokely was saying by Black Power was political and economic and cultural self-determination, right? Once we can do it ourselves and be the avatars of our own destiny, we're going to be fine. The problem right now is we are not the avatars of our own destiny. You can carve out a space for yourself, but I'm always interested in the collective. I'm not just interested in saying, look, I'm good, and Aya Amani, my daughter, is good. My people are good. That's not enough, right? And we've never done that. We've always been saying the collective. Some of us have become individuals, and that's fine for them. They have the right to do that. I'm actually not going to demonize them. But I want the people who are interested in community development and radical self-determination for the Black community. And not just the Black community, for everybody in this room. Because if we transform racial injustice in this room, we're going to connect that to economic injustice. So white people, Latinos, immigrants, LGBT, everyone's going to get access, workers. We have always been the canary in the coal mine.
Yes.
When white America has a cold, Black America has pneumonia and is on its deathbed. That's what happens. That's not just a metaphor, that's the truth. And you see in every single social economic indicator, right? So the onus is always on us. The onus is on us. So don't let anybody tell you that you didn't fight for what we have now. It's just that we didn't win. The struggle continues. You know, the whole thing, a luta continua, it continues. That's what we're saying, right? So the onus is on you to find out about this struggle and to get in where you fit in before it's too late.
Teach them. Yes. Yes.
My name is Matthew Obefan. I'm a student at the University of Minnesota. I'm here for the Kente Summit, which is a summit with Minnesota private colleges, and they recently invited the University of Minnesota too as well to come participate. I honestly have not heard of him before, but I had a little bit of information before I came today through an email about him coming, and so I got interested in that, and so I wanted to come check it out, and I was thoroughly impressed. I loved how he's able to connect the civil rights movement with the Black Lives Matter movement and to show the parallels there, because too often those two are separated and used to kind of in some ways show a disconnect. And so it's nice seeing him like show that, no, in some ways they're very, very similar. So I really appreciated that, and that was, as a young millennial, for me, my movement is the Black Lives Matter movement, and so BLM. And so having him show the historical context and how it's important today really helped me, in some ways help understand.